October 27, 1962. Washington, D.C. late afternoon. Rain pressed softly against the tall windows of the Oval Office, turning the White House lawn into a dull gray smear. Inside, the air was stale with cigarette smoke and tension that had nowhere left to go. President John F. Kennedy sat motionless at the edge of the resolute desk, his jacket off, his tie loosened, a yellow legal pad untouched in front of him. For 13 days, the world had balanced on the edge of annihilation. Now, with a single report arriving from the Atlantic, Kennedy understood something he had not allowed himself to fully face before. They were running out of time. Just hours earlier, an American U-2 reconnaissance plane had vanished over Cuba. Radar contact lost, no distress signal, no confirmation, only silence. Kennedy closed his eyes briefly, feeling the ache behind them deepen. He did not yet know whether the pilot was dead, whether Soviet forces had fired deliberately, or whether this was the spark that would trigger a chain reaction no one alive could stop. But he could hear it already, the steady ticking of a clock that no one could see, counting down towards something final. The room around him was unnaturally quiet, the muffled hum of air conditioning, the distant murmur of aides in the corridor. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang and went unanswered. Kennedy leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fingers interlaced, staring at the floor. He had not slept properly in days. His back throbbed with pain he rarely mentioned. His mind, however, was sharp with a clarity that frightened him. He understood now that this crisis was no longer theoretical. It was no longer about speeches or pressure or appearances. Men were dying. And men with weapons far more destructive than any in human history were waiting for orders. In Moscow, Nikita Khrushchev was facing a realization of his own. He had sent missiles to Cuba to protect a fragile ally and to correct what he saw as a strategic imbalance. American nuclear weapons surrounded the Soviet Union. From Turkey, from Italy, from Britain, Kiev was supposed to be a bargaining chip, a show of strength. But now events were slipping beyond his control. Soviet commanders on the ground had authority he could not instantly revoke. Messages crossed the Atlantic slowly, filtered through translators, delays, and assumptions. Khrushchev did not know that Kennedy was searching desperately for a way out. Kennedy did not know that Khrushchev was too. What neither man fully grasped, what history would reveal only later, was how close the machinery of war already was to acting on its own. That afternoon, deep beneath the ocean's surface, a Soviet submarine battered by American depth charges, meant as warning signals, drifted in suffocating heat. Its captain believed war might already have begun. Its nuclear torpedoes sat armed, one decision away, one agreement short. One voice raised or silenced could decide whether cities lived or vanished. Kennedy stood and walked slowly toward the window, placing a hand against the cool glass. He could see nothing of Cuba from here. No missile sites, no submarines, no countdown clocks, just rain falling on grass, tourists unaware that the world had narrowed to a handful of men and a few unbearable choices. For the first time since the crisis began, Kennedy allowed the thought to form fully, without euphemism or distance. This could end everything. The Cold War had been built on abstractions, deterrence, containment, balance. But on October 27, 1962, those abstractions collapsed into something brutally simple. If a single order was misunderstood, if a single commander acted on instinct rather than restraint, the exchange would begin. And once it began, there would be no stopping it. No negotiations, no second thoughts. Only consequences measured in millions of lives and centuries of fallout. Kennedy turned back toward the desk as another message arrived. He did not know yet that this day would later be called Black Saturday. He did not know that historians would count the minutes and argue over how close the world truly came. What he knew, what he felt in the pit of his stomach, was that leadership had never meant this before. Not speeches, not elections, but the unbearable weight of knowing that restraint, not strength, might be the most dangerous decision of all. And somewhere unseen and unheard, the clock kept ticking. The report reached the Pentagon first, carried by a naval officer, whose voice betrayed nothing of the implications behind his words. The U-2 was gone, not turned back, not diverted, gone. In the corridors beneath the building, where fluorescent lights never dimmed and maps never slept, planners immediately began adjusting timelines. Protocols existed for moments like this. They had been rehearsed, refined, laminated, and memorized. If an American reconnaissance aircraft was shot down, escalation was not a possibility. It was an expectation. At the White House, the message arrived without drama. A folded paper, a quiet sentence. Kennedy read it once, then again, slower the second time. His jaw tightened. He did not raise his voice. He did not swear. He simply nodded as if acknowledging a diagnosis he had long suspected, but hoped would never be confirmed. A man was dead, and the logic of the Cold War demanded an answer. Across the table, the members of the executive committee watched him closely. Generals sat rigid, their uniforms pressed, their posture immaculate. Civilians leaned forward, hands clasped, faces pale. For days they had argued over airstrikes, invasions, blockades, each option precise, catastrophic, and irreversible in its own way. Now, with blood spilled, the arguments took on a sharper edge. The military case was clean. Retaliation would restore credibility. Failure to respond would invite weakness. The systems were designed to punish hesitation. Kennedy listened. He always listened longer than they expected. In the Caribbean, American destroyers continued their slow, deliberate patrols, dropping small practice depth charges into the sea. The explosions were not meant to harm. They were signals, requests for Soviet submarines to surface and identify themselves. But inside one of those submarines, the sound was terrifying. Metal groaned with each concussion. The temperature inside climbed past endurance. Batteries drained, air grew foul. Sweat-soaked uniforms. The crew had been submerged for days, cut off from Moscow, cut off from any confirmation of peace. The captain believed the war might already have begun. In the narrow control room, officers argued in low, strained voices. The American Navy was attacking, they said. This is how it would start. Their orders were clear. If war broke out, they were to strike. The submarine carried a nuclear torpedo, powerful enough to erase an entire fleet. One launch, one flash. One mushroom cloud blooming over open water, seen by every radar station in the hemisphere. Two of the three officers required to authorize the launch were ready. The third hesitated. Back in Washington, Kennedy asked a question that surprised the room. Not about targets, not about readiness. He asked how long it would take, once an order was given before the first missile hit its mark. The answer came quickly, minutes. Less, depending on who moved first. He nodded again, absorbing the meaning. There would be no recall button, no apology sufficient to undo it. History would not pause for clarification. He thought of letters he had read from Hiroshima survivors, of children burned by shadows, of cities flattened into geometry. He thought of his own children, still young enough to believe the world was stable, permanent, safe. He thought of the men in uniform who would execute whatever decision he made, trusting that it had been necessary. In Moscow, Khrushchev paced. Reports contradicted each other. Some advisors urged defiance, others urged restraint. The missiles in Cuba were operational now, but barely. American planes flew overhead constantly. An invasion felt inevitable. Khrushchev understood something that his critics did not. Once the shooting started, ideology would not matter. Control would vanish, events would outrun intentions, messages were drafted. Revised, torn up. Each word felt too sharp or too weak. Each phrase risked misunderstanding. He dictated a letter that sounded almost desperate, appealing not to strength but to reason, to survival. It crossed the ocean slowly, carried by diplomats who could not know whether it would arrive in time to matter. Late that night, Kennedy sat alone rereading the competing messages from Moscow, one harsh, one conciliatory. Two voices, two paths. He sensed the human hand behind them. The strain, the fear barely hidden beneath formal language. This was not a chess match anymore. It was two men, separated by ideology and geography, staring at the same abyss from opposite sides. And beneath the waves, the submarine's air grew thinner. The argument intensified, tempers flared, sweat dripped onto control panels. The torpedo waited, inert and patient as it had been designed to do. History hung not on strategy or doctrine, but on whether one exhausted officer would sign his name. The world would never know how close it came that night, not yet. For now, all that existed were decisions made in isolation, under pressure, with incomplete information. The machines were ready, the men were human, and the margin for error had all but disappeared. Morning came without relief. October 27, 1962, moved forward as if it were any other day. But every hour carried the weight of an ending. Newspapers were printed. Traffic moved, children went to school. And inside command centers scattered across two hemispheres, men stared at instruments that told a very different story. This was the day when restraint would either hold or collapse completely. In Washington, the atmosphere had shifted. The calm discipline of earlier meetings was gone, replaced by something sharper, more brittle. The downing of the U-2 could no longer be explained away as an accident. Military advisors argued that the rules of deterrence demanded response. Credibility, they said, was the currency of survival. If the United States absorbed a direct attack and did nothing, every alliance would weaken, every adversary would test the limits. Kennedy heard the arguments, but his mind kept returning to a simpler question. What happens next? Not in theory, not in doctrine. In reality, airstrikes on Cuba would not end the crisis. They would begin a different one. Soviet technicians would die. Soviet soldiers would respond. Missiles already in place might launch before they could be destroyed. And once the first nuclear weapon detonated, anywhere events would outrun every plan drawn up in peacetime conference rooms. At nearly the same moment, a second American U-2 drifted off course over the Arctic, straying into Soviet airspace. Radar stations lit up. Interceptors scrambled. For several minutes, Moscow faced a terrifying possibility that the United States had begun a strategic reconnaissance ahead of an attack. Soviet pilots closed in, fingers tense on triggers, waiting for orders that did not come. The aircraft escaped, barely. Neither side knew how close that mistake had come to igniting the very war both claimed to be trying to prevent. By midday, a new message arrived from Moscow. This one was different. Gone was the bluster, the ideological language. In its place was something almost raw. The Soviet leader wrote not as a rival, but as a man imagining the end of the world in vivid detail. Cities burning, survivors envying the dead, history ending not with victory, but with silence. He urged restraint. He proposed a deal. Missiles out of Cuba in exchange for a public promise. No invasion. Kennedy read it slowly, then he read it again. There was a catch. A second message, harsher in tone, demanded more: removal of American missiles from Turkey. Publicly accepting that demand would fracture NATO and signal weakness. Privately rejecting it might doom the negotiations entirely. Two messages, two paths. No certainty which one truly reflected Moscow's intent. Around the table, debate reignited. Some argued the softer message should be ignored, dismissed as emotional noise. Others insisted it was the only lifeline left. Kennedy watched the arguments unfold, aware that every additional hour increased the risk that someone, somewhere, would make a decision for him. He asked for the room to clear. Left alone, Kennedy sat in silence. He did not think in slogans, he thought in consequences. He understood something now that no briefing paper could fully convey. The systems built to protect nations were too fast, too rigid, too powerful to trust completely. Control was already slipping, handed piece by piece to protocols, to radar operators, to exhausted men in steel tubes beneath the sea. When the advisors returned, Kennedy spoke quietly. The United States would respond to the first message. Publicly, calmly, missiles out of Cuba. No invasion. As for Turkey, that would be handled later, privately, discreetly, without forcing either side into a corner. It was a gamble, but every option left was a gamble now. The reply was sent. That night, in the Soviet submarine, the situation reached its breaking point. The crew was near collapse. The captain was convinced the Americans were preparing to destroy them. The nuclear torpedo was armed. Authorization was demanded. 2 officers agreed. The third did not. He argued, he delayed. He refused to sign. Minutes stretched, tempers flared. And finally, against every expectation, the order was not given. The submarine surfaced. Above water, the crisis did not end immediately, but something fundamental had shifted. The countdown that had dominated every calculation slowed, then stalled. Messages continued to cross the Atlantic. Tension remained. But the machinery of annihilation, which had been humming relentlessly, began, almost imperceptibly, to power down. Black Saturday passed without a nuclear exchange. No celebrations followed, no sense of triumph. Only exhaustion, and the dawning realization that survival had hinged not on strength but on hesitation, on doubt, on fear, on a handful of men choosing not to act when every system around them was urging them to do so. The world had come closer to the edge than anyone would admit for decades. The most dangerous moment of the crisis did not end with an announcement. It ended with absence. No sirens sounded, no missiles launched. Instead, there was a slow, almost unnatural quiet that settled over command rooms on both sides of the world. Radar screens still glowed, submarines still tracked shadows beneath the water. Bombers remained fueled on distant runways. But the expectation of immediate catastrophe, the sense that the next hour would decide everything, began to loosen its grip. In Washington, Kennedy did not celebrate. He looked older than he had 2 weeks earlier. His shoulders sagged as the adrenaline drained away, replaced by something heavier, comprehension. For the first time, he fully understood how little margin for error the modern world allowed. The Cold War, he realized, was not a contest that could be won. It was a condition that had to be managed, constantly, carefully, and with an acceptance of permanent risk. Privately, he ordered a review of every moment where control had nearly slipped away. The lost aircraft, the delayed messages, the authority given to commanders far from Washington. The realization was sobering. Even with restraint at the top, the system itself was designed to move toward escalation. Speed had replaced judgment. Automation had replaced deliberation. The presidency, he now saw, was less powerful than it appeared when measured against the machinery it commanded. In Moscow, Khrushchev faced a different reckoning. He had avoided nuclear war, but at a cost. Within the Soviet leadership, critics whispered that he had blinked, that he had risked too much and gained too little. He defended his decision with images, not ideology, descriptions of burning cities, poisoned fields, generations erased. He knew what many of his rivals did not want to admit. Survival itself had been the victory. The missiles in Cuba were dismantled under international observation. American ships watched silently as Soviet vessels carried them away. It was a strange inversion of power, strength displayed not through force but through compliance. In return, the United States quietly removed its own missiles from Turkey months later, without public acknowledgement. The bargain held because neither side needed to prove it had won. But beneath the surface, something profound had changed. Both governments began to understand how close they had come, not in abstract terms, but in minutes and miscalculations. Analysts reconstructed timelines and found gaps that chilled them. A misread signal here, a delayed order there, a single submarine commander who might have chosen differently. The escape had not been clean. It had been accidental, human, and fragile. From that realization came caution, not peace but restraint. A direct communications link was established between Washington and Moscow, not a symbol, but a practical concession to reality. Leaders could no longer afford delays measured in hours when decisions were measured in seconds. Arms control discussions followed, tentative and limited, but grounded in a new understanding. The greatest threat was not the enemy's intention, but the system's momentum. Kennedy would later reflect that the crisis had taught him more than any briefing or campaign ever had. Power, he learned, was not the ability to destroy, but the ability to stop destruction once it had been set in motion. Khrushchev, too, would look back on those days as the moment he saw the true shape of nuclear war. Not glorious, not decisive, but terminal. The world moved on quickly, as it always does. News cycles shifted. Crises replaced crises. Most people never knew how close the end had come, and those who did were discouraged from saying so. The Cold War resumed its uneasy rhythm. Missiles remained, plans remained, fear remained. But somewhere deep in the structure of global power, a memory had been implanted, a quiet warning carried by those who had been closest to the edge. It said that the next crisis might not allow for hesitation, that luck was not a strategy, and that the survival of millions had once depended on a handful of individuals choosing patience over pride. The silence after October 1962 was not peace. It was a pause, and pauses, history had shown, could end at any time. The realization did not arrive as a sentence, it arrived as weight. In the days after the crisis, Kennedy moved through meetings and briefings with a changed posture, as if something invisible pressed down on him. The immediate danger had passed, But the knowledge of how narrowly it had passed did not fade. It sharpened. He replayed moments in his mind, the lost aircraft, the delayed messages, the submarine no one had known was there. Each one revealed the same truth from a different angle. The world had survived not because its systems worked, but because they failed slowly enough for humans to intervene. Kennedy understood now that nuclear war would not begin with villains laughing in command rooms. It would begin with confusion, with exhaustion, with men acting on incomplete information under unbearable pressure. The greatest danger was not aggression, but momentum. The way machines and doctrines pushed decisions forward faster than judgment could follow. He carried that understanding quietly. There was no public speech announcing it, no triumphant declaration. Instead, there were small, deliberate shifts, a preference for private channels over public ultimatums, a suspicion of absolute certainty, a belief that empathy, imagining the fears and limits of the man on the other side, was not weakness but survival. Khrushchev reached a similar conclusion, though it cost him politically. Within 2 years, he would be removed from power, criticized for recklessness, for backing down, for risking humiliation, yet in private he remained unrepentant. He had seen the edge. He had looked into a future without history, and he had chosen retreat over oblivion. The world never learned the full story at the time. It learned fragments, sanitized versions. What it did not learn, what remained buried in archives and memories, was how much depended on restraint exercised far from cameras and headlines. A submarine officer refusing to sign, a president choosing not to strike, a rival leader writing not as an ideologue, but as a father imagining the end of cities. In October 1962, humanity did not solve the problem of nuclear war. It merely survived its first full encounter with it. Kennedy would later say that the crisis forced both sides to step back from the brink, not because they trusted each other, but because they feared the alternative more. That fear became a kind of shared language, unspoken but understood. It shaped treaties, it shaped communication, it shaped the quiet rules that governed future confrontations. The opening image of that rainy afternoon in Washington never left him. A desk at a window, a decision that could not be taken back. The memory served as a warning, not just about weapons, but about certainty, about the danger of believing that control is absolute when it is anything but. History often records victories and defeats. October 1962 recorded something rarer, a moment when the most powerful men on Earth learned how little power they truly had. And for a few fragile days, that knowledge was enough to keep the world alive. Thanks for watching. History isn't just a record of what happened, it's a record of how close things came to ending. If you value stories told with depth, restraint, and truth, subscribe for more moments that shaped our world. See you in the next one.